Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muliwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the adorable neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very, very honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Would you please be kind enough to subscribe to our show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Greg Howard. He is here to celebrate his middle grade novel. It's called The Visitors. Before we invite Greg into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Linux Takes Flight, a great kids' book by Iolani Bullock. Lennox is an imaginative kid who loves airplanes and dreams that one day he'll get to board one. When his parents announce that the family is taking a trip overseas, Lennox learns that his great-granddad was a Tuskegee airman who earned pilot wings. He cannot wait to board his first flight and get a pair of his own wings until the excitement causes him to lose his passport in the airport. Lennox and his little sister Tegan set out on an adventure to find it before their flight takes off. This is a really, really fun book. It encourages kids to be curious and to also really embrace the idea that our differences make us special. Lennox Takes Flight, beautiful book by Iolani Bullock. Join us right now for one of my favorite cities in the world, Nashville in Tennessee. Our guest today is here to celebrate The Visitors. Please welcome to the show, Greg Howard. Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm great, Jed. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to speak to you. As I said, I love Nashville. It's a fun place. There is so much, it seems like there's so much creativity happening in Nashville.
There is. And, most people just associate it with just country music, but there's such a wider scene of creativity here, from art to jazz, to just all different kinds of creativity other than just country music. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but yeah, it's kind of broad in the spectrum.
Yeah. And there's a lot of creativity going on in the culinary world in Nashville too.
Oh, yeah. It's become quite the foodie paradise around here. I can't even keep up with what's the new hottest place I'm supposed to go to.
Yeah, we went to a really hot place a few years back in East Nashville, and we were told going in that you're not allowed to take anything home because it won't meet our standards when you reheat it. And I thought, oh my, we're just kind of full of ourselves, aren't we?
That's a little much, I think.
So
that is funny.
Yeah, tell us about The Visitors, please.
Well, The Visitors is my third middle grade novel, and it centers on the story. The narrator is a 12-year-old spirit who finds himself stuck, so to speak, at this deserted rice plantation in the low country of South Carolina. And he can't remember his name. He can't figure out why he's stuck there. And he, most importantly, can't figure out how to move on from this place, this very sad, frightening sometimes place. All he knows is that the last time he was there, something bad happened and a boy got hurt. And that's all he remembers. But then we have some modern day kids show up who are doing a little investigation for their podcast about a decades old mystery. And he starts to remember things. So the story's kind of about him developing a friendship with these living kids, and the living kids kind of help him figure out what happened to him and how he can move on.
As you were talking about the spirit being in this place that's familiar but uncomfortable, and not knowing why they're there and not knowing how to get out of there, I think that's the way a lot of kids in that middle grade age feel sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was certainly that way. When I write middle grade books, there's always pieces of me in there, and the kind of interesting thing about this character is he's a spirit, so he's a ghost. We know that he died a while back, but he can choose whether or not people see him. He can be invisible or he can show himself. And that's really how it is for a lot of kids who are trying to figure out who they are. And maybe they're not sure that if people saw the real them, that they would be accepted. So they sometimes, and I did this when I was in middle school, you present yourself one way to one person and another way to another person, try to remain invisible in other situations. So, yeah, I think it kind of mirrors a lot what middle school kids are going through.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I kind of, it was a lot longer time ago when I was in middle school, but I do kind of definitely remember being one way for one person, another way for another person. Actually got called out on it once by my middle school principal.
Yeah. Well, and middle school kids are just trying to figure out where they fit, and who's going to accept them for who they are and who they can show themselves authentically to.
Yeah. And I think that's, we talk about what kind of conversations families can have if they co-read or read together a book like The Visitors. And I think that's kind of a great kind of topic that any family can have reading any book, just that who are we? And who are you? Where do you see yourself in the world?
Right, and being comfortable with who you are and learning to accept yourself and love yourself. And, even, the spirit that is the main character in this book, he is gay. He knows he's attracted to other boys. And the time he grew up, which was in the early 70s, he knew he had to hide that part of himself. And he couldn't be open with his family. He couldn't be open with his friends because of what, he was in the Deep South and what everything around him told him. He never, like me, he never saw himself represented in books or, on TV or in movies or anything like that. So, I was that age when I was growing up in South Carolina, low country, and I felt like I was the only little boy in the world who was attracted to other boys because I didn't see myself anywhere. And I think that's another good reason for kids to read books like this, and even parents to read them with them so they can understand that they're not alone. That's the biggest message I try to give kids in my books is that they're not alone. And their stories have value and they matter.
Yeah. If there was a phrase or a sentence that your parents could have said to you at that time to help you feel comfortable with yourself and more comfortable within your family, do you know what it could be?
Oh, sure. It's actually what my dad said to me when I was a 40-something-year-old man, and I told him for the first time that I was in a relationship with a man. I thought surely he knew, I mean, I'd, never been married. Not that that means you're gay if you're never married, but I just thought surely he knows, or he suspects. And so when I told him, he was surprised. He said he didn't have any idea. And we grew up in a very strict religious home. And we grew up in a Pentecostal church. We were in church 3 times a week. And I heard the message from the pulpit many, many times that homosexuality was absolutely the worst sin there was. So that was being fed into my small, young soul. So when I came out to my dad when I was an adult, I said, well, what about how your faith and how you grew up and how I grew up? How do you feel about that? And he said something very honest. He was a simple man, but he was a very religious man. He said, well, I don't know. All I can say is that you're my child and I love you and I just want you to be happy. And that just made the moment beautiful. And I wish I would have heard that when I was young. But quite frankly, I didn't really give my mom died when I was 5, so it was really my dad. I didn't really give him the opportunity to tell me that because I didn't feel like I could be honest with him. So I think at that age, I wish I would have heard, no matter what you're going through, you can talk to me and I will always love you no matter what. That might have opened me up to have the conversation with my father about what I was going through then, instead of feeling all alone and hopeless, and then my mind going into these dark places. When I was 12, I started thinking about death and wanting to die and thinking about suicide because I didn't think there was a choice for me in the world because I didn't see it.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the reasons I asked you that question is that I've had friends of mine come up to me and say, "Hey, I think my kid's gay. What should I do? You know, I need to talk to somebody about it." And I said, "You might want to talk to your kid about it."
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. I'm sorry. I've heard a lot of parents, they've asked me that question too. And a lot of them say, well, I don't want to embarrass them by bringing it up or embarrass her by bringing it up. And I want them to tell me when they're ready. But see, what they're missing is that a lot of times the kids just don't know if their parents are going to accept them. Even though they might come from the most loving home in the world, I still hear kids talk about how they're afraid that if they tell their parents that somehow their relationship with their parents is going to change. So, I mean, I'm certainly not a proponent of, dragging it out of a kid, but letting the kid know that you're a safe place and that kid can tell you anything and you will not love them any less or any differently. That's what I think kids need to hear to feel safe enough to take that step to talk to them.
Do you think that, if a parent is not wanting to embarrass a kid, but wanting to just get that message across to kids, is reading The Visitors together, and could that be a great way just to kind of open up the conversation, just to say, hey, I wish that ghost dad had just said, I love you no matter what.
Right. Yeah. And I do hear from readers, parents who have given my books to their child when they think that might be the case. And they will either just give it to them and say, hey, see if you like this book, or they will read it with them. And I've heard over and over how reading a book like The Visitors or, books like it, where a kid sees themselves represented, is what gets that kid starting to talk to their parents about it. And I've gotten a lot of emails from parents saying, I read The Whispers, which was my first middle grade book, with my son, and it really opened up conversation between this, so I could tell him that I love him no matter what, which is the message of that book. So yeah, I think reading, or at least getting the books into the hands of kids. If you think your kid's gay, get them a book that, you think might help them through that if you don't feel like they're ready to talk to you. And then maybe that will start the conversation, which, is why it is heartbreaking to see adults, educators, lawmakers trying to take these books off the shelves and limit access to those books that are so desperately needed by the kids.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the things I saw in the notes getting ready for the interview was that The Visitors touches on the idea of toxic masculinity. I've heard that phrase a lot. I can't say it very well. But I don't know. It seems like there's no clear defined definition. It's, there's sometimes when somebody is competitive, they're like, oh, that's toxic masculinity. What does it mean for you?
Well, for me, as I can only speak to my experience as a gay kid, every message around me was about being masculine. And what that meant was very narrow. That meant that you're supposed to go hunting and like it and like killing animals. You're supposed to play sports. You're not supposed to be singing in a choir or playing the piano, which I did both of those things, because I had no interest in sports and no interest in hunting. You're supposed to do these manly things like that in order to be a man. Mm-hmm. And, it's a terrible message to give a kid. Kids are all over the spectrum. They're just different, and sometimes just because even a straight kid or a heterosexual kid, just because they don't like sports and hunting, that doesn't mean they're gay. Mm-hmm. I think tearing down those walls of toxic masculinity. And I think the way I look at that term is that, for me, it was very repressive. It was like this message of masculinity thrown at me from every angle from the time I could walk and talk, and that I knew I didn't fit into that mold. And that caused a lot of turmoil in me. And to me, that's where the toxic part comes, because those kind of messages make people who are not don't enjoy those things, or I'm sorry, little boys who don't enjoy those things, it's telling them that there's something wrong with them. And I think, to me, that's the toxic part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Boy, I would not have been appreciated down south because the idea of hunting just...
I know, and I had an older brother. He was 2 years older, and there was a clear division in our household that he was a daddy's boy and I was a mama's boy.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he did everything with my dad. He worked in the yard, and he went hunting, and he played baseball and all those kinds of things. He just loved doing those things. He even loved cutting the grass. And we had to cut the grass, and we had to take turns, and he'd always want to take my turn. I'm like, well, sure, go right ahead. Me, I was with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to be with my mom, and usually that meant indoors doing what she was doing, cleaning the house or whatever. I just wanted to be with her, And then when she died, when I was 5 years old, that was a huge, huge loss in my life. My brother still had my dad there, but I felt like I had no one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the fond memories I do educational magic shows around the country, and I was in Georgia, and I was doing this one routine where I was asking kids what kind of gifts that they have and how can they use those gifts to make the world a better place. And there was a young lady, 8th grade, I think, and I said, so, what are you great at? And she goes, I'm a great shot. And I'm like, oh, great shot, you like basketball? She goes, no, I'm a great shot. And I'm like, with a gun? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, sorry, I'm a Yankee.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, we put people in boxes, especially down here in the South. You got to stay in your box.
Well, I think that's true everywhere, because we've hosted international kids, and they're different boxes, and there's certainly boxes here in the North that people get put into. But we've hosted kids from India and Italy and China and Japan, and they're all little boxes that the people feel that they need to fit into. And I really haven't found anybody that's perfectly fit into any of the boxes that is supposed to be their home.
Yeah, I don't know why we try to do that. I mean, it just seems like a lesson in futility that we don't ever learn.
Yeah,
Nobody's the same. Every single person is different, and I don't know why we feel like we have to, you're good at, you got to do sports and you got to go hunting. I don't get that,
Yeah. What is it about this age group, the middle grade group, that you enjoy writing for?
Oh, thanks. That's a great question. Because my first book that was published through Simon & Schuster was not for this age group. It was a book for teens. It's called Social Intercourse. And it's a little more like a racy, gay rom-com of a book. And it was the first book that got me my agent and got me my publishing deal. And so it was a big deal for me. And everybody was kind of expecting me to follow that up with another hysterical, racy kind of, gay rom-com. And I felt like I had told that story. So I had been wanting to write a story about my mother and my relationship with her, and as a tribute to her. And I had to write that story, I would have to put myself in the mindset of being that little kid again. Like I said, I was 5 when my mom died, but to write for middle grade, you need to be writing about characters that are, 11, 12, 13 years old. And so what I had to do was I told my agent, I was like, I've got this story I want to write, but it's middle grade. And she's like, oh, no, they're going to want another YA from you, whatever. So, I said, you know what? I just got to write it. So I wrote it, and I really just loved it so much. And I loved being in that mindset of an 11-year-old boy. And a lot of that book, The Whispers, is very autobiographical. It's all fiction, but my family's in there, experience I had are in there. My mother's story's in there. So it was a very personal book. So I was able to go right back into I remember how I felt during that time. And I remember the loneliness and the depression, which I didn't know was depression. I remember all those things. So it kind of was easy for me to get into that voice, and I just loved it so much. And it was very well received. And the biggest thing I loved about it was meeting kids that age, meeting middle school kids, and just seeing the light in their eyes when they talked about the book. And I was like, I think this is my lane. I think this is, where I fit best. And so I've been doing that ever since.
That is a great age group of kids to meet. It's, there's they still are able to put their foot back into childhood. They're struggling, they're racing to become the adult that they think they're supposed to be. But they're also able just to kind of dip their toe back into their very youth.
Right.
That's not an expression, but I think you know what I mean.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. They can kind of go either way. And it's a very exciting time for them. And they can, kind of shrink back to their younger kind of self, or they can push themselves forward into a little bit older. And it's a very exciting time. Now, it can be a very traumatic time, as a lot of people know, because kids that age, a lot of kids that age, I should say, not all kids that age, can be unkind. Because you're just learning how to socialize. I mean, of course you socialized when you were younger, but you're trying to socialize in this completely new environment of middle school, and you don't always get it right. And sometimes you come across as mean, and when you might not mean to, other times you might mean to, because sometimes you might come across as being overly sensitive. You just come across in all different ways to all kinds of people. But they're just trying to find their way in the world at that age. And that's what I think is so great about writing for that age group.
Yeah. How has writing for this age group changed you over the years?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I think how it has changed me, it has kind of opened my eyes to what kids are going through today. Because, I'm a 55-year-old man. So, I am not anywhere near a middle school student's age. But what's surprising to me, Jed, is that I thought that since I was in middle school so long ago, that things were so much different now and so much better. In a lot of ways, they are. But what just surprised me were when kids at school visits and book festivals, that middle school age, would come up to me and say things like, this is the first book I've ever seen a character that was like me. And I know that there are other books out there, by other great authors like Barbara D. and Shannon Hitchcock and Alex Gino. I know those books are out there, but they didn't have access to them. They didn't maybe know where to get them or how to get them. But it kind of shocks me, when a kid says that's the first time they've seen themselves in a book. And also when I talk to kids who are very honest with me. Some kids have come out to me and I'm the first person they've ever told, that they're gay, lesbian, or transgender. And that's a very humbling thing. And I think all that to get around to the answer of your question, when I first wrote social intercourse, I didn't have any idea what I was doing really. And I just thought it was, this is great. And I'm going to be this amazing author and I'm going to be on the New York Times bestseller list and there are going to be movie deals. And that's what I thought writing was until I went to my very first book festival and students were there. It was student day. And I started having these kids come up to me and just bare their souls and come out to me in tears. And I was so incredibly humbled. It just completely, it changed my whole direction in writing. So it really did kind of change my life at that moment for, what I'm doing is very important and I need to respect that. And I need to be careful for one thing, and that I'm not guiding kids in some kind of, bad direction. But this is a very personal and deeply emotional thing for these kids. And I have to respect that. And it was just so humbling. It completely changed my whole attitude about writing.
Yeah. It sounds like this is not so much a career as a calling.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I've been in the music business for 30 plus years, and that was not a calling. I like the music business. I came to Nashville to be in the music business, but it wasn't until I wrote my first book and met that first kid at a book festival who bared their soul to me and in tears sometimes that I understood that you're exactly right, that this was a calling that I needed to pursue.
Yeah. And as we're speaking here, I'm reminded of that preacher talking to your dad, telling your dad that homosexuality was the worst thing in the world. And in reality, I think the worst thing in the world is preaching it's okay to hate.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And so you're taking care of a lot of the mistakes that preachers like that have made over the years.
Yeah. And again, I want to say that I'm not saying all religion is bad.
Sure.
Not all churches are bad. So let me just qualify that by saying, but there are unfortunately a lot of, pastors and preachers out there who are preaching sometimes just their beliefs, and their beliefs might not be actually even biblical sometimes. It just might be what they were taught when they were young, and so that has become their doctrine. And it's so damaging. Like I say, as a young kid sitting in those sermons 3 times a week, twice on Sundays, and hearing that kind of message, it just made me shrink further and further into myself and not feel like I could tell anybody, not even my dad.
Yeah. Well, we're really happy that you were able to tell your dad and that he embraced you and let you know that he loved you. I'm really happy that you're writing books like The Visitors, giving kids a chance to see themselves in a real positive way, and hopefully growing closer to their families. Greg, real quick, where can people go to find out more about The Visitors and find out more about you?
Well, you can go to my website, which is www.greghowardbooks.com. And then I am on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Greg Howard Books.
Awesome. We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Visitors, a really great middle grade novel from our guest, Greg Howard. Greg, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Ed. It was great.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Kaya Henderson. Kaya is the former head of the Washington, D.C. public school system. She'll be here to talk to us about Reconstruction, a really wonderful website with some great resources for families. You're going to be fascinated to learn about Reconstruction. You're also going to be fascinated. Kaya has some really wonderful insights into education, how things that schools are doing right, things that schools can do better. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, speaking of doing things better, you may be frustrated at how hard it is to let people know about your book. We would love to help you. There are so many ways we can help you celebrate your book. You can be a guest here on the podcast. It's fun. It's easy. It gives you the chance to sit down and talk for 20, 25 minutes about your book, letting people know why they might want to check it out. You can also submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel. If they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. And boy, once that happens, folks are going to know that your book is worthy of their consideration. And we would love to help you celebrate your book with our monthly promotion program that will celebrate your book through an entire month with commercials on our podcast, with messages to our 75,000 plus social media followers, and display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. Learn all about it by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page and scroll on down to the various services. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Greg Howard. Please be sure to check out The Visitors. Also want to thank our sponsor, Iolani Bullock. Please be sure to check out Lennox Takes Flight. I want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all think that we should thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for letting people know about the podcast. But most of all, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.